The heroes have gathered together to face death itself, the Misty Flower crew and their leader known as the Immortal, a man who cannot die. A berserker player named Yunha lived to destroy monsters. That was the whole point of his existence. He and his team descended into one of the 8 black dungeons of the world, the Abyss. No one had ever gone that far before. Many monsters were destroyed there, but many more remained to be slain. But Yunha knew neither rest nor sleep. All he cared about after defeating each monster was which monster to defeat next. And in the Abyss, there was plenty to choose from. It seemed that there were so many possible opponents that it was impossible to remember each one, and not even necessary. The hero fought bravely. He did not yet know that in this dungeon his life of 32 years would come to an end. He crushed one creature with his sword and was already preparing for the next fatal blow, putting all his strength and power into each of them. Behind him were mountains of slain monsters, but Yunha did not look back, moving forward without stopping. And this was a mistake, because the threat was lurking where no one expected it. The monster swung its powerful spiked tail. Yunha felt movement from behind just when it was too late to dodge the blow. After the hero lost his balance, he did not have time to block the next attack. The monster's sharp teeth sank into the hand holding the sword. The confrontation lasted for several minutes. The armor protected the young man well, but the pressure of the monster's jaw became stronger and stronger. At that moment, another blow of the tail followed, and now our hero was unable to stay on his feet. He staggered and began to fall. The stones flew in all directions, but Yunhei managed to free his hand with the weapon and strike back. The monster's head flew high into the air. Another enemy was defeated only to give way to the next one. The new monster was much larger and more terrifying. One of its limbs resembled a huge mace with spikes. When he got a better look at his enemy, Yunha realized that the monster's second arm was no less dangerous. The monster's mouth opened and it let out a terrifying roar. Its teeth were suspiciously similar to human teeth. Could it really be a mutant that once lived among people? Our hero was not prone to sentimentality. He saw a threat, and all he was interested in was how to get rid of it as quickly as possible and move on. But Yunha struck with his sword, but immediately realized why the monster's teeth were not sharp, but wide. The enemy simply clamped the blade like a vice. The sword was broken under the pressure of the jaws. The hero cursed and began to think about how best to act in this situation. He jumped up and pushed off the monster's back with his legs to jump further away, increasing the distance. Upon landing, Yunha sent a wave of splashes around him, defeating so many monsters that the entire ground was covered in pools of blood. Even though the weapon was broken, it was still possible to fight for one's life and fight with the remaining part of the blade. But Yunha enveloped it in mana, which made the fragment much stronger, while the monster gained momentum for an attack. Despite its incredible size, the monster was quite fast and agile, and the distance was reduced very quickly. Our hero's broken sword, glowing blue, floated in the air, transformed into a powerful weapon and ready to deliver its final blow. The monster was huge, but Yunha calculated the trajectory of his sword correctly and hit his opponent in the neck, the most vulnerable spot. The blade entered the creature's body up to the hilt, bloody streams gushed from its mouth, and a monstrous roar almost deafened the hero. With a sharp movement, Yunha pulled his weapon out of the dead carcass and turned around to assess the situation around him. There were no new opponents in sight, and the young man happily inhaled as much air as he could, checking to see if his ribs were intact. Not long ago, he had fallen hard on his back. It was necessary to assess the situation behind him, but Yunha looked back. His eyes lit up with fire. It was a special vision. The hero saw that behind him were not only the defeated monsters, but also the other hunters who had descended into the dungeon with the team. All were dead. Well, if there was no one else to help, Yunha decided to help himself and began looking for a new sword to continue his journey forward. A suitable blade was found quite quickly. With its help, one could try to pass through the stone gates towering in front of the warrior. It didn't matter, but Yunha was determined to overcome the obstacle and defeat the dungeon boss, even if he was alone. What this boss would be like could be guessed from the stone images of monsters on the gates. Our hero headed straight towards them. He pushed his sword into the crack, making it a little wider, and then used his hands to push the gate apart enough to walk through. Then the rocks continued to move on their own, and the hunter resolutely entered where no man had ever entered before. There was nothing there but dense, impenetrable darkness. The light coming through the gate was only enough for a few meters. But Yunha assessed this impenetrable darkness and realized that the boss, the master of darkness, was definitely hiding right here, nearby. Suddenly, the young man's eyes widened in horror. He realized that he had made an unforgivable mistake by underestimating his opponent. The master of darkness was also looking at him. The attack was so swift that the hero did not even understand how it happened. He was already falling backwards with a fatal wound in his chest. The numerous rocks, one of which had pierced Yunhee's body, flew back at a terrifying speed under the impact of the powerful force of the blow. The hero was turned upside down several times. He was completely helpless. The weapon fell from his hands. Blood flew in all directions. The movement did not stop. Falling to the ground, Yuna realized that this was the end. He couldn't move even the tip of his finger. The hero laughed ominously. He didn't expect to die so stupidly. The player's last thoughts were that humanity was not yet ready to fight the Master of Shadows. He was too strong. The hero sat in a pool of blood, leaning against a rock, and thought that it wasn't so bad to meet his death in a dungeon where no one had ever reached. Here, he heard a deafening cry full of despair. The girl ordered Yunhei not to even think about dying. She cursed and scolded him, urging him not to give up. It was Li Yuan. Our hero looked at her and thought that it was a hallucination. She could not have survived, and even more so, to be nearby so deep in the dungeon. The girl was a good magician. Tears were running down her face, but her hands were doing their job. She was casting a healing spell. Kneeling over Yunhei, Li Yuan tried her best to close his wound, but it was a huge hole in his stomach, and the task was impossible. The hero realized that he had no chance of surviving, so he asked his friend to leave him and quickly save his own life. Yen screamed at the guy to shut up immediately and not interfere with her doing her job. She needed to convince him that there was hope. In fact, the wounds were too serious, and no healing would help restore the internal organs in such a situation. It could only be a miracle. At this time, Yunha thought that he had already died and entered the afterlife. He did not yet know that a miracle had happened. The guy regretted leaving his partner alone in the dungeon and asked her for forgiveness. He had dedicated his entire life to destroying monsters, caring little about others. He also remembered Baekryun, a girl who had just entered adulthood, and Yunha mentally thanked her for seeing only the best in him. His partner, Li Yuan, attempted to transport the hunter back in time to save his life. This was the miracle she was hoping for and bringing it to life. There was a limit to time travel, but the girl didn't care what price she had to pay for it. And a miracle happened. The desire to save his partner was so strong that he was soon swallowed up by a stream of yellow radiance to take him away from the darkest dungeon forever. This radiance became blinding, and it was no longer possible to make out anything. And this is how miracles of the great power of desire are accomplished. Some people were standing over him and holding out a rattle. They called him by name and asked him to look at them. Our hero decided that he was hallucinating again. Yunha opened his eyes and tried to focus. It was his mother and father. They smiled happily that their son had woken up. The baby wanted to tell his parents a lot, but he was barely a month old, so all he could do was coo. While the mother reproached the father for waking the baby, our hero tried to understand why the afterlife looked like his room as a baby. Mom and Dad looked at the baby again and affectionately asked if he had woken up to look at them. The child reached out and grabbed the woman's little finger tightly, as if he was checking to see if she was real or not. She tenderly asked how long he wanted to hold her hand, while her father plaintively reminded her that he also had hands, and as many as 10 fingers, and it seemed he was a little jealous. Our hero realized that this was not the afterlife, but that he was in the body of a child, and he could not yet speak or even move. He didn't die. He went back in time to when he was only a month old. Yunha continued to hold his mother's finger and thought that this was simply impossible. He realized that Yuan had performed a miracle right before his death. The impossible had happened against all laws. The girl was equal in power to the 12 thrones. It was no wonder that she had succeeded. The parents continued to discuss which of them their son looked more like. He had his father's smile and his mother's eyes. The child looked at them sadly with an adult look. Yunha did not think that he would ever see his parents alive again, but it happened. They died when he was 6 years old. They were killed by monsters. Since then, the boy saw the meaning of his existence in the destruction of monsters. But thanks to Yuan, he had a second chance, so No Yunha vowed that this time he would be able to change the future. He was so determined that he even clenched his fist, but it was the fist of a 1-year-old child, whose parents almost cried with emotion and began to take pictures of their son. Even though our hero retained the memory of his life, he still remained a child, and therefore had very limited opportunities, which was unbearable. All his tasks were reduced to eating well and sleeping. Such torture continued day after day. He had to come up with at least some kind of activity for himself. Given a second chance, Yunha started his journey almost from the beginning, and the first task he gave himself was to simply turn over. While he was trying to practice this simple action several times, his older sister Yuna came up and began to encourage the little one. Yuna was 4 years older than our hero and loved him more than anyone in the world, which meant she spent a lot of time with her little brother. Our hero was surprised that his memories of his sister were much weaker than those of his parents, but he remembered one moment from the past in detail. On the day their mom and dad died, Yuna hugged her brother tightly and promised him that she would always be there for him no matter what happened. On the day the monsters killed their parents, the sister hugged Yunhu tightly and promised him that everything would be fine. She repeated this phrase hundreds of times until her voice began to disappear. In his new second life, the boy, to Yuna's joyful cries, finally made a coup and consolidated his success with another attempt. The girl grabbed him in her arms and continued to praise him. Our hero had not received so much tenderness and love for a long time. At the age of 9 months, Yunha was already sitting confidently, and he was able to see and notice more, and he discovered that mana was all around him. As an adult, the hero constantly experienced a mana deficit, so he decided to start saving it now to create a reserve while his body allowed it. From the outside, it looked rather strange, and my sister asked him what interesting thing he was doing. The boy looked at her, not knowing how to explain, since he still couldn't talk, and then he noticed something interesting. Yuna was like a sponge, soaked in mana that there was so much of it that sometimes the glow went beyond the boundaries of her body, creating a shining silhouette, like a shadow. While she was lifting the baby into her arms, the hero thought that such an amount of mana for an adult would be dangerous and threatening to health. It could end in pyknosis. While the girl was teaching him to walk, Yuna thought about how he needed to teach her to control her energy before it put her life at risk. At the age of 4, our hero began to fulfill this task, because by this time, he had already learned to speak well and move confidently, and also often spent time playing with his sister on the street. She was very sociable and kind to everyone, and although many did not like the gloomy Yunhu, Yuna still continued to take her little brother with her everywhere. The children in the yard always happily invited the girl to join the game. She was cheerful and very inventive. Unlike her brother, the girl got along well not only with children, but also with adults. The neighbors were simply delighted with her. Yunhee's communications with others were completely different and rarely brought pleasure to both parties. One day, he and his sister went out for a walk, and a slightly older girl with crimson hair called out to the boy. She blocked his path and looked at him defiantly, as if waiting to see if Yunha would rise to the provocation or not. Everyone liked to tease him. The girl asked why he had come there. Without thinking twice, our hero explained that he had been dragged there, but that it did not concern her, Dryan Minzy, in any way. The girl got really angry and shouted that she had asked him not to call her that 1,000 times. Kim Minji, that's her name. Yunha pretended that he didn't hear again. The kids on the playground suggested playing Cossacks and robbers because there were quite a lot of kids there, and Minzy continued to be indignant. Yunha was not delighted. He did not understand at all why he needed to spend time in such company at 32 plus 4 years old, but for the sake of his sister, he endured. Yuna was very happy when she managed to drag him to the playground and even play together, This time was no exception. Noticing the displeasure on her brother's face, she decided that the problem was that he was not familiar with the rules of the game, so she cheerfully began to explain. Our hero didn't listen. He was simply pleased to see his sister's smile. He had been deprived of this pleasure for many years. The children had a pretty good time together and only went home when the sun began to sink towards the horizon. Yunha was unhappy that he got so dirty during the game. His clothes looked like he had dug a trench. Yuna continued to have fun and said that it was not scary. The main thing was that they had fun, wasn't that right? She asked. The brother muttered that that was true, but he didn't like walking around the city like that. It would be better to stop and tidy himself up a bit. They would have had to stop in any case. A very angry mutant dog appeared in the middle of the street. It bared its teeth, drooling from its mouth. The girl froze in fear, but still stood a little ahead of her brother in order to protect him with herself in case of an attack. The children froze, not moving, and the dog, with flashing red eyes, came closer and closer to them, preparing to attack. It was difficult to figure out whether it was just a feral dog or an animal with rabies, or a real mutant that had escaped control. Yuna tried to cover her brother with her hand again, but Yunha was completely calm and didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. The girl was very scared but tried not to show it so as not to scare her brother. She tried to assure him that everything was okay. Our hero remembered how on her last day of life she did the same thing, calming him down so he wouldn't be afraid, promising that everything would be fine. Now Yuna's face was just as worried and full of concern for Yunhu as it had been then. He decided that this time he would not allow trouble to happen. The boy looked at the dog with his childish eyes, and the man in his head was considering whether he had the right to use his magical skills. Finally, the decision was made, and Yunha placed his hand on his sister's forearm, covering it with her body so that she would not be afraid. He stepped forward decisively, causing some confusion in Yuna. She did not understand what was happening and why her brother was doing this. Yunha thought that in that life he was weak and just trembled in his sister's arms. But now everything will be completely different. It's time to change his destiny. The boy took another decisive step forward to avoid the mistakes of the past in his new life. He was so confident in his abilities that Yuna did not interfere. She simply stood behind her brother and watched what was happening. The boy cast a defensive spell, using up almost all of his mana, and the dog sensed the threat and stopped. There was so much energy in the air that the animal did not risk attacking. Receiving such a rebuff from a child was something new for her. The mouth opened and closed again, then opened again, but not to bite, but to catch its breath, knocked out by fear. Using the power of suggestion, Yunha commanded the creature to immediately get out of their way, or better yet, to disappear immediately. The animal didn't have to be told twice. The dog quickly turned around and began to run away from this sudden threat. The children watched as the dog ran away into the darkness of the gateway. Yuna didn't understand how her brother managed to do this. Having weakened the protective barrier, Yunha breathed a sigh of relief. In the body of a child, he used magic for the first time and was not at all sure that he would be able to use his skills from his past life successfully. Yuna was shocked. She saw the blue glow of the spell and heard her brother's sigh, so the first thing the girl asked was if he was okay. Yunha answered in the affirmative. He hastened to reassure his little sister, saying that their adventure had turned out to be fun. The girl calmed down and began to ask how her brother did it, whether it was mana, and when he would teach her to do such tricks too. Our hero was a little puzzled, but then decided that this was exactly the reaction of his sister that he should have expected. The moment was quite touching. He pretended to be tired and promised to teach Yuna, which caused a new wave of joy and gratitude towards him. Yun smiled and thought that why not, after all, he was going to prepare his sister for the upcoming events anyway. The girl was very inspired. She couldn't wait to learn how to control mana, because not every person is capable of this. But then Yuna remembered that they were already late getting home, and pulled her little brother forward. They needed to get back before their mother started to worry. Yunha thought that he was ready to give his life for this smile. His family was killed when he was 6 years old, so he needed to hurry with the preparations. In order to change the future, he was ready to do anything, but now he just needed to go home, and that was happiness. Nevertheless, thoughts about the tragedy continued to disturb our hero, but now a plan was maturing in his brain on how to prevent it. Yunha started training by bringing a top and asking his little sister to spin it without using her hands, just with her willpower and mana. Yuna had plenty of mana, but directing it in the right direction was not so easy. The top moved chaotically, without spinning. The girl complained that it was very difficult to control the flow of energy, but her brother assured her that after a few training sessions, everything would work out. Yunha thought with regret that his sister had the gift of storing large amounts of mana since birth, but she had absolutely no ability to control it. But he did not say this out loud. Yuna seemed to read his thoughts. She decisively exclaimed that now she would succeed. She would spin the top correctly on the first try. The girl put all her energy into spinning the top, her hands releasing a stream of mana so strong that it would be enough to demolish a wall. Luckily, there was no wall in front of her, but the top spun so fast that it bounced off the floor, hit the corner of the sofa, and flew over Yuna's shoulder. Then she hit the wall, bounced back, then forward again, to one side, and then the other. Our hero realized that his sister still had a lot to learn, but the first steps had been taken. After a while, the family gathered in front of the TV. Some beauty received a prestigious Academy Award and showered her with gratitude. The house was warm and cozy. Despite the fact that it was winter outside, the feeling of warmth and comfort did not leave our hero. In a few minutes, the new year was supposed to come. Mom reminded Yunhee that next year he would be 6 years old, which meant that, as promised, he had to go to kindergarten. The boy frowned and muttered that he absolutely didn't need a garden, his mother agreed, but added that she could use some more free time, and besides, she had to keep her word. Our hero thought that this would be fair, since he had already avoided the garden for quite a long time, terrorizing his parents with constant whining. He really didn't want to spend time around noisy children who cried for any reason. Just thinking about it gave Yunhee a headache. The hosts of the program reported that there was 1 minute left before the new year. This moment will change the future of all humanity, as a very important event must occur. The announcer asked for attention on the screen. Their correspondent was supposed to go live from the scene of the events. A girl appeared with headphones and a microphone, who said that she was at the Yongmyo Temple, where their ancestors, members of the Joseon dynasty, were buried, and where a new page in Korean history would begin. Our hero grabbed his head. He already knew what kind of new chapter this would be, but he still wanted to refresh his memories and hoped that this time everything would be different. After humanity discovered mana and learned how to use it, everyone seemed to go crazy about it and used skills uncontrollably. But they didn't take into account that this would lead to the appearance of monsters, and on the very day that the 21st century began, an incident called the End of the Century occurred. The monsters destroyed approximately 30% of the planet's population, and the remaining survivors literally trembled with fear. Monsters appeared literally out of nowhere, and it took a long time before the cause was found. The government and laws were no longer in force. The only force that now had weight was mana, which caused a new hierarchy to emerge on Earth, with the rich and the hunters who controlled mana coming to power. Before the situation could be stabilized, the cities lost contact with each other, and humanity was on the brink of survival, in constant horror and chaos. But in Korea, full of despair, a small light of salvation lit up, giving hope to millions of people. It was at the Chonmyo Temple that the beautiful Lim Ga-il appeared, and in the moonlight she came out to people for the first time. Both her face and her clothes were so beautiful that millions of viewers could not take their eyes off their television screens. Yuna also gasped in admiration and even clasped her hands, whispering that she had never seen anyone more beautiful in the world. Lim Ga-il used to be a popular actress, but now she became the first protector goddess of Korea, who needed to give people hope for the future. The woman had the gift of white grace, or more precisely, the ability to stop the action of mana and disperse it. All the players who defended the temple altar became the sword protectors of Korea and were called the 12 Thrones. All the players were controlled by mana control forces, but the strongest of them created their own clans, a thought that haunted Yunhee. As a person with the rarest gift that could stop monsters, Lim Ga-il was chosen to become one of the 12 thrones that protected Korea. She was already a very influential person before, but after becoming the throne, this woman's power increased indescribably. After all, players in this position received help from the clan and help from the Mana Control Committee. This made it possible to monitor the activities of all other players and subordinate them to one's will. One could not even dream of greater power. Lim Ga-il raised both her hands and addressed the 12 thrones with a speech, the gist of which was that their activities should bear good fruit. The woman approached the glowing magic ball and laid her hands on it. The ritual began with the words of prayer. The goddess turned to all the other gods of the earth and heaven with a request to grant her the strength to protect her country at all costs. The glow from the ball became larger and larger, and mana shot out from Lim Ga-il's hands towards the sky in a column of blue radiance. Within minutes, the dome of blue energy began to cover houses, trees, and fields, as if it was trying to cover the entire territory of Korea. The glow was so bright that there was no longer any need to look at the TV screen. The blue light penetrated into the houses of the cities straight from the street, from the sky. The correspondent happily informed the viewers that right now they were watching a protective hemisphere open up, a barrier that would help control the mana and prevent it from raging. Hearing that the barrier could be seen throughout the country, Yuna ran to the balcony to see the miracle with her own eyes. The girl's eyes were shining. She believed that the dome would protect them all. Yunha, who had joined his sister, did not share her delight, but remained silent. The sight was truly stunning. The girl even opened her mouth from the excess of emotion. She had never seen such beauty before. Everything around was filled with diffused blue light. People went outside to look at the dome and feel the sense of security they had long dreamed of. The parents joined Yuna and Yunha, smiling as they listened to the girl's excited cries about how the sky was now incredibly beautiful. The father folded his hands in a prayer of gratitude and said that now they could finally live in peace and quiet. The mother also thanked the goddess and began to pray. Her face glowed with joy and happiness. One could look at it endlessly. All the people around did the same. On the balcony opposite, another family froze in a happy prayer of gratitude, and another one a little lower. The people thanked Lim Ga-il with all their hearts. They believed that now the monsters would leave their country alone and everyone would be safe. Yuna and Yunhee's parents continued to pray, now silently, but it was not difficult to guess what words they were saying in their thoughts. The girl decided that she wanted to pray too. She folded her hands and invited her brother to join them. The boy looked at her with distrust. He was not naive, and besides, he knew what awaited their family and the whole country in the future. Yunha sadly bowed his head and thought that he really had no one to pray to. There would soon be no gods in this world. When the end came, all the gods died too, as did hundreds of millions of the planet's population, as did those who now came out onto the balconies with hope and gratitude. He looked at the windows of the surrounding houses and saw only shadows, only dark silhouettes of the people who lived in them, but it was a memory. Now the windows were shining with a bright and warm light, and people were really alive and celebrating the arrival of the new year, praying and thanking Lim Ga-il for the protective dome. The skies are turning black again, our hero thought, pushing away the vision that had washed over him a minute earlier. Now was not the right moment for this. He heard his sister asking the gods to grant their family a happy and prosperous life, to protect them from all evil. Yunha looked at the girl who seemed like a real angel to him. Hope was awakening in his heart. He wanted everything to turn out exactly as Yuna asked. The boy firmly decided that in this life he would truly be happy with his family, because that was why he was given a second chance. He joined his family in prayer. But in reality, Yunhei was turning 6, which meant that the incident that took the lives of his family was getting closer. The master of darkness was not sleeping. The kraken that killed Yunhee's mom and dad didn't sleep either. Our hero tried not to think about it, but subconsciously felt what was in store for them all. Well, while the boy was waiting for a new stage in his childhood life, the announced kindergarten, by the way, looked quite attractive and was called Doan Evergreen Pines. Teacher Tayo greeted Yunhu and informed the children that a new friend would be joining them from now on. He asked the boy if he would like to introduce himself and tell the other children a little about himself so that they could make friends. Our hero was a man of few words. He gave his name and age, after which he again fell silent with a sullen look. After thinking, he looked at the children sitting on the rug and added that he was very glad to meet everyone. This was not true, but it was polite. Teacher Tayo praised the boy, but noted that the welcoming speech was short. Maybe he should tell something more about himself to make friends. Yunha thought that he was not interested in children friends. But then he noticed a familiar hairstyle among those present, and then a face, and the next moment, indignant exclamations flew towards Yunhee. It was Kim Minji who asked in a displeased tone what he had forgotten in their group, why he had come here, and so on. Our hero was unpleasantly surprised and asked why Drin Minzi was bothering him again, since he was simply busy with his own affairs. The girl was really angry. She didn't want the other children to find out about the unpleasant nickname that Yunha had given her. Teacher Tayo asked the children to calm down. They had enough free time before lunch to make friends, but certainly not to get into conflict. His suggestion to be more friendly towards the new boy caused a whole wave of shouts and questions. Everyone wanted to know where the boy lived, what his favorite color was, and so on. After listening to the children and assessing the situation, Tayo decided that everything was going as it should be. He promised Yunhee that he would soon have many friends. As soon as the opportunity arose to escape from the children and their questions, our hero took advantage of it. He left the playroom and thought that he couldn't stand children. Here he saw a sign indicating a children's book corner, something like a small reading room. This was more interesting. The books were mostly children's, but killing time reading in silence was much more pleasant than fighting off persistent questions. Our hero chose a comfortable stool and began to look for a well-lit place to sit down with a book. He sat down at the table, but his attention was constantly drawn to the pink bow in the hair of the girl who was reading on the other side of the table, which prevented him from concentrating. Slowly turning page after page, Yunha felt that the girl was looking at him carefully, but with his peripheral vision, he saw that she wasn't even looking at the book. Yunha also stopped reading and stared blankly into the space in front of him. He didn't know how to ask the girl not to look so as not to offend her. The baby was quite beautiful. She had huge eyes and dark hair, but the pink bow was incredibly annoying. Apparently, it wasn't just Yunhu. Some boy approached the girl from behind and called out to her in a loud voice. It was Cho Yonghook and his friends Ma Banjin and Yong Sinjin, who cheekily asked what the point of sitting around reading was. Yonghook asked the girl, whose name was Yang Hye Yang, why she was always with a book, and whether she didn't have a single friend. The little girl turned to him and simply asked him to leave her alone, but this only made the boy even more angry. The guy screamed that he was terribly irritated by her vulgar pink ribbon and literally tore the bow out of her hair. The girl tried to take the ribbon back, almost crying. Yan Hayan explained that her dad gave it to her, to which the boy replied that he would not give the bow back simply because he did not want it. Yonhuk began throwing the ribbon to his comrades, inviting the girl to take her bow from her opponents like a basketball. Yan Hayan did not do this. She folded her hands and with tears in her voice asked for the commemorative ribbon to be returned to her. The bully didn't listen. He continued to tease the girl and stick his tongue out at her. It was very childish and not at all gentlemanly. Yunha continued reading, not paying attention to what was happening, but then he again felt the girl's pleading gaze on his back and without turning his head, ordered her to give him the bow. Yonhook looked angrily at the hero. The provocation had succeeded. He was lucky enough to run into resistance, which was what the boy was trying to achieve by starting a fight. Yunha slowly rose from his stool and considered whether it was acceptable to swing his fists on his first day of kindergarten. He approached the offender and said that he was behaving like a baby and that the game the boys were playing was not fun at all. Yonhuk called Yunhu a moron and swung his arm to hit him. Apparently, the bully solved all his problems with force and was used to bullying children. He couldn't know that the boy in front of him had 32 years of life experience behind him. Yunha skillfully dodged the blow. The next moment, the offender was already flying back, turning upside down in the air. Everything happened very quickly. Our hero caught the pink bow on the fly and quickly walked forward as if nothing had happened at all. Yonhook hadn't even had time to land on the ground yet, and his opponent was already handing over a commemorative ribbon to Yang Hyeyang. The girl was confused and surprised. Looking at her grateful eyes, Yunha asked Hyeyang not to let anyone take her things away from her anymore. Surrounded by his friends, Yonhook promised that he would not leave this incident unpunished, to which our hero thought that it was not so scary to hear threats from a 6-year-old. Here he felt some movement of the aura and looked back at the enemy. It felt like there really was danger in the air. The bully promised that next time Yunhei would really get into trouble if he got in his way. Our hero did not pay attention to him, but at that moment he felt that someone was pulling him by the sleeve of his sweater. It was Yang Hyun, thus calling Yunhu to thank him for helping her return the memorable pink bow. The girl clutched the ribbon to her chest and was clearly embarrassed. But she still managed to overcome her indecision, looked up at Yunhu and said with a smile, "Thank you for what he did." Just at that moment, Yunha was thinking that among all the children in the garden, Minji and Yonhook had a lot of mana, while the rest didn't stand out. But then he looked at Yan Haiyan with a special vision and was simply stunned by what he saw. The hero did not expect such a turn of events. The girl had so much mana that even Yuna was left behind. Our hero had never seen such an amount of energy. He was so surprised that he even stepped back a little. Yan Haiyan had the power to destroy half a city, but she didn't even know about her own strength. Yunha noticed that the girl skillfully controlled her mana. Such a child had every chance of becoming one of the 12 thrones, or their protege at the very least. He leaned over to get a better look at her face. Before the regression, the hero had never heard the name Yan Haiyan, and it was strange. Even without becoming a player, she should have become famous already because of the amount of mana. Yunha extended his hand for a handshake and invited the little girl to become friends, adding that he didn't know why, but he really wanted to. Haiyan blushed, embarrassed again, but extended her hand in response and nodded hesitantly. She really didn't have any friends. The girl did not suspect that this time they paid attention to her rather out of mercantile interests, because our hero knew that mana was the greatest force in their world. Haiyan thanked him for the offer and shook his outstretched hand. Now Yunhee had the opportunity to stay closer to her. Yan Haiyan laughed and said that they would not just be friends, but good friends. She was absolutely sure of it. A little more time passed and the holiday of gratitude to parents arrived. Everything went on as usual in Yunhee's house. Mom pinned on the red carnations that were given to her, a symbol of celebration. She was very pleased and thanked her son for such a wonderful gift. Our hero was a little surprised. He made this carnation in kindergarten, but did not take it out of his backpack. His mother found it herself and pinned it to his sweater. The sister also received a portion of praise. The mother said that the flower the girl made looked even better than the real one and stroked her head. Yunha looked at his sister's carnation and thought that she hadn't really done it very well, but there was no need to be surprised. Yuna was, unlike him, a real child. Then Mom remembered that Yunhee had another craft in her backpack. She asked who this carnation was for. Maybe for Yuna. The girl was happy. The woman added that it was very gallant of him and asked who the third flower was for them. The boy didn't know what to answer. The question had driven him into a corner because in fact he had made the third carnation more out of habit. In the end, Yuna replied that he had prepared gifts for his mother, for Yuna, and for his grandmother, which surprised everyone very much. The fact is that having become an orphan, before the regression, our hero every year on this day made a carnation for his grandmother, who was raising him at the time. But he never gave his gift, he just left it in his backpack. The woman always found it herself and decorated their modest room. On none of the holidays did the boy give carnations directly. He suffered greatly from the fact that on Parents' Day, his only relative was his grandmother. To mark the holiday, the government decided to open the closed roads so that families could see their relatives who live far away. This was announced on television. A large number of player hunters were hired to protect the population that decided to travel in the event of monsters appearing. Our hero already knew that on that day, the 4th of May, many people died, including his family, who were destroyed by a giant kraken on the way to the city where his grandmother lived. Just when Yunha was thinking about this, his father came to him and said that the holidays were starting, the roads were open, which meant they could go on a trip. Yuna said that she wanted to go to her grandmother. Her parents happily supported this idea. Besides, they really hadn't seen each other for a long time. Yunha became determined to change the future and therefore realized that he had to cancel this trip at any cost. But it had to be done correctly. There was only one grandmother, and the father was an orphan, which meant that it would not be possible to suggest going to other relatives. The boy loved his maternal grandmother very much, so he didn't want to upset her or upset his relatives by refusing. His grandmother raised him after the death of his parents, doing everything possible to ensure that Yunha grew up to be a worthy person, always supporting him, even in the face of failure. As a result, he became a player. But then she died. The father interrupted the hero's thoughts, reminding him that the roads were open, but they would most likely be closed again after the holiday, and that he needed to decide quickly. Yunha plucked up his courage and suggested to his parents that they go to visit his grandmother another time. He heard what his father said, but decided to take a risk. The parents looked at their son with bewilderment. Firstly, he rarely contradicted them, and secondly, he loved his grandmother very much, so much so that he even made a carnation for her. The mother leaned over to the boy and reminded him about the carnation. She asked if her son wanted to see his grandmother and why she was suggesting going another time. Yunha replied that he wanted to, but not on that day. He again asked to postpone the trip, which caused concern to his mother. Our hero realized that he is just a child. His word means nothing, therefore, in order to achieve success, he needs to behave accordingly, like a child. The boy exclaimed that soon it would be Children's Day, that there was an amusement park near their house, which they had never been to, and that there were rides there that he dreamed of riding. Hearing what her brother was talking about, Yuna also shouted that she really wanted to go to the amusement park. She had completely forgotten about it and had long dreamed of going on a ride. The parents didn't mind. They thought that the children really deserved a trip to the amusement park. It was very close, but because of the monsters, neither Yuna nor Yunha had ever been there. The father smiled and said that they would definitely correct this unfortunate misunderstanding and go ride the rides tomorrow. Mom, smiling, added that this was a good reason to cook something tasty and asked what kind of treat the children would like. Yuna screamed that she wanted nuggets and sandwiches. Yuna almost jumped with joy. It seems his plan worked. Our hero was inspired. If you can't stand in the way of the kraken, you can stand in the way of your parents, and then everything will be fine. Then the phone rang. It was quite unexpected because the work calls had already ended. Yunha felt that something was wrong. It was as if the universe did not give him a chance to interfere with the events of the future. His mother was talking on the phone, and her voice was becoming more and more anxious. At this point, sweat began to run down the woman's forehead. She asked several times how her mother was feeling now, her voice trembling. At the end of the conversation, my mother asked me to take care of my grandmother and call her whenever necessary. They would pay for everything. After hanging up the phone, the woman's face darkened. She was very worried. Her husband and daughter rushed to ask what had happened and if the grandmother was okay. Mom explained that no one knows the details yet, and there is no diagnosis either, but Grandma fainted and is currently undergoing examination. Yunha was scared. Nothing like this had happened before his regression. His grandmother had absolutely no health problems until he entered the Players' Academy. Mom tried to calm herself and her family down by saying that it was probably nothing serious, but she wanted to see her grandmother to make sure. Dad supported this idea, saying that he was also worried, so he would go with her. But what about the children, he added. Father told Yuna and Yunha that they couldn't go to the park because they would be going to Grandma's tomorrow once the road security was ready. Mom looked at Yunhu. He was very scared and tense. The woman thought it was because of the amusement park, so she decided to talk to him separately. She leaned over and began to console the boy, saying that everyone would definitely go to the amusement park, just another day, and that right now their care was really needed by their grandmother. Our hero thought that he only tried to change the future, and immediately the grandmother suffered. Who knows what might happen if he does not stop these attempts? If he couldn't stop his family from facing the Kraken, then why would he even have a second chance? Yunha was desperate. But still, the new life was somewhat different from the previous one because something had changed significantly. He himself had changed. Since childhood, he has been accumulating mana and has already collected a decent amount. In addition, he has combat experience from his past life, and in it, he was one of the strongest players. The boy told his mother that it was okay. He agreed. But he himself thought that if he couldn't prevent his family from meeting the Kraken, then he could do something else. Yunha stood facing the wall and thought about his battle plan. Mom and Yuna decided that he was upset and began to console him. But our hero imagined what the monster he had to defeat looked like. Every detail, right down to every sucker on the tentacles, surfaced in his memory. He was gathering his resolve to destroy the enemy, even if he was in the body of a 6-year-old boy. Yunha thought that he would fight the monster with all the means available to him. He would make every effort to prevent his parents and sister from dying. The Mana Control Bureau has classified all monsters based on the level of threat they pose. Monsters of the 9th, 8th, and 7th levels were minor nuisances, such as environmental pollution and the like, while monsters of the 6th level posed a danger to entire areas of cities. Level 5 and 4 creatures committed mass murder and could threaten an entire city and were considered equivalent to medium-strength earthquakes. 3rd-level monsters brought hordes of weaker monsters with them and threatened the well-being of an entire country. They were associated with natural disasters. The Kraken was one of these, committing mass murder and even affecting the Korean government as it could not be neutralized. The 2nd-tier monsters were a disaster for the continent, while the 1st-tier monsters threatened the existence of all of humanity, such as the Master of Darkness that Yunha fought in the abyss, almost dying. Yunha rummaged through his desk drawer, trying to find a weapon suitable for defeating the Kraken, something he had done quite easily when he was an adult. The thing is that mostly C-rank players were hired to guard the roads, and their skills were not enough to defeat such a monster. Our hero sighed, thinking that in a child's body it would be unlikely that he would be able to significantly influence the situation. It was necessary to buy time until the 12 thrones arrived to help, because with fire magic they could deal with the Kraken quite easily. At least last time, it took literally 15 minutes and one of the warriors to stabilize the situation. He took quite a bit of damage, the monster's tentacles repeatedly knocking the player back, but he had good stamina and fighting skills. Of the suitable items, our hero found only scissors and a stationary paper knife. If he enveloped them in mana, he could count on several fairly successful attacks. It would be nice to take a kitchen knife, but Mom would notice if it was missing, so I'll have to use what I found. Mom just looked into her son's room, asking if he was getting ready for the trip. They were about to leave. Everyone was ready, so the woman hurried Yunhu. They needed to get there before the traffic jam started. There were quite a few people who wanted to travel to their relatives. The boy smiled and asked for another 5 minutes. He still had to find and put literally a couple more things in his backpack. Finally, Yunha zipped up his backpack and announced that he was ready. He was ready not only for the trip, but also for the fact that he would have to fight off the monster. The sun was on the horizon, and the streets and bridges of the city were filled with endless streams of cars. Everyone was rushing to take advantage of the open roads. Our hero's family was unable to avoid traffic jams. Their red car stopped in another traffic jam. Yuna was already tired, and they hadn't even left the city yet. Mom turned to the children and suggested that they sleep. Apparently, the road promised to be very long. The boy replied that he was fine and smiled. Yuna fell asleep, leaning on his shoulder, and it was nice to feel the warmth and breath of her little sister. The car gradually moved forward. Now they were driving along the Sansan Bridge, and our hero began to become noticeably nervous. The thing is that last time the Kraken appeared as soon as their car drove onto the bridge. This time they drove halfway, but the monster was still not there. This meant only one thing. Something else had changed in the future, something that Yunha didn't even know about yet, and it visibly scared him. He asked the gods for only one thing, that they would just let the car pass the bridge in peace. But the future could not be changed. An explosion was heard ahead. Mom watched in horror as pieces of asphalt and cars flew in different directions. There was no way to turn the car around and go back because of the traffic. The father froze. He understood that they had absolutely no chance of saving the children while in the car, but at the same time, getting out of the car meant being left completely without shelter. Machine parts and rocks continued to fly at them. The Kraken's tentacles were destroying the bridge and everything on it, and new fires were breaking out. Yuna started to wake up. Yunha continued to hold her hand, trying not to let her get too scared. It seemed to him that the monster was simply mocking his desperate desire to change the future, which is why it was in no hurry to show itself. And then he saw it. It was that same Kraken, a monster equated to a natural disaster within the city. With its tentacles, it scattered cars with passengers like children's toys, demolished houses and bridge supports with one blow, and it was no longer possible to stay in place. His parents realized it too. The father attempted to back up, still hesitating to get out of the car, but the road was blocked by an accident. Someone had already tried to do this before and failed. People ran out onto the bridge and tried to escape by moving in the opposite direction. Everyone was wondering where the players hired for security were. Finally, the player hunters appeared and headed straight for the Kraken's tentacles. The situation could become more favorable. The guards were well armed and prepared to save as many people as possible, but someone had to disarm the Kraken. But then one of them noticed an additional threat that he had not expected at all. The man froze, unable to move. The Kraken's tentacle was rapidly descending straight towards him, and now there was no longer a player, nor a couple of cars near which he was. It was only a miracle that Yunhee's parents' car was not hit. The other guards, and we remember that their rank was quite low, looked with horror at what was left of their colleague. Everyone reacted differently. Some of the players tried to inflict at least some damage on the monster, while others simply ran away. People got out from under the rubble on their own. Yunhee and Yun's parents continued to sit in a daze, not daring to get out of the car, but sooner or later it still had to be done. Finally, the father voiced what everyone was afraid of. We needed to get out, but with extreme caution, because there was complete chaos outside. In a trembling voice, the man tried to convince the family that if they moved slowly, everything would end well. Yunha looked at his dad as if for the last time. He knew something that was still unknown to his father. Mom turned to the children and said that she loved them, and they needed to do as Dad said. That way they would be saved, the players would protect them. They opened the door and took their first steps across the bridge. Yuna was the last to get out of the car. She was the most scared of all. When getting out of the car, the little girl tripped and twisted her ankle. Yunha did not have time to give her a hand in time, and something irreparable happened. Now the girl was sitting on the ground and trying to stand up on her foot in fear, but she was unable to do so, and she declared that she could not walk on her own. Yuna began to cry, realizing that she needed to get up and save herself, but she couldn't do it. She was afraid of dying herself, but even more afraid of putting her loved ones at risk. Then the father said that there was no point in shedding tears. He could easily carry his daughter in his arms. That way they would walk slower, but would still be able to move forward. He approached the baby and began to carefully lift her up. Mom and Yunha did not interfere so as not to create unnecessary trouble. The boy was scared, but not for himself, but for his family. His father asked if he could go and received an affirmative answer. Then one of the players ran up to them and ordered them to follow him in order to get to the evacuation point in the safest way. Yunha thought that while the regular players were in a panic, the veterans quickly adapted to the situation and began evacuating people. The boy remembered how it was last time. The Kraken was not the only problem. He needed to cross the bridge before other monsters attacked. But they didn't have time. The next moment, the player who had agreed to accompany them was pierced through and through with a spear. He fell down dead, and Yunhee's father stopped. He didn't know what to do now, continued to make his way to the shelter, or return to the car. The man watched in horror as whole hordes of new, terrifying monsters rose from the water across the bridge. Here, one of them grabbed the railing with his clawed paws and was ready to appear right in front of our heroes. Yunha realized that what he feared most had happened. The creatures had appeared before his family had managed to get off the bridge. They were Class 7 monsters, divers, but there were so many of them that the number of human casualties increased with every minute. Half-fish with terrible predatory teeth used spears as weapons, although they were quite capable of simply biting off anyone's head. The female player, who specialized in healing, narrowly escaped the attack, but who knows how long she can hold out. The veterans quickly got their bearings and began to repel the attack, covering the advance of the civilians. One of the players was holding a wounded girl in his arms and asked if there were any healers nearby. The woman we had already noticed volunteered to help and ran forward only a few meters away from the injured girl. But the huntress couldn't overcome them either. The spear of another diver struck the target with lightning speed, and it fell dead. There were so many monsters that the people who found themselves surrounded had practically no chance of survival. The Yunhee family stood in the middle of this chaos in complete confusion. Right around them, the divers were going wild. A little further away, the kraken was tearing apart the remains of the bridge with its tentacles. Here, the father asked the children to obey and do what he tells them without hesitation, and he in turn promises to protect them. He ordered his wife and son not to look back and just run forward, and advised his daughter to close her eyes. There was no time to think. They all ran. It was the only chance to survive, but no one could give any guarantees that the attempt would be successful. Just at that moment, a kraken tentacle flew over them and simply grabbed several cars and their passengers in an armful. The second tentacle repeated the same thing and lifted the cars up, only to then simply throw them off the bridge. The third tentacle destroyed both the bridge and the cars with direct blows, completely unconcerned about how effective such tactics were. Yunha looked at what was happening and realized that his father had not made the best decision. Running forward was too dangerous. The boy tried to call out to his dad, who was moving ahead, clearing the way as best he could and tell him about it. But the father already understood that he had to stop. With another blow of the tentacle, the kraken threw the fuel tanker and provoked a powerful explosion. A new fire started. There was practically nothing left of the bridge ahead, and Yunhee's family simply stood there and looked at the wall of flames ahead. It was unclear what to do next, where to go, especially since our heroes simply froze, desperately trying to come up with at least something. The players also didn't know what to do. The road was destroyed. Reinforcements weren't arriving. People only had a couple of minutes to get their bearings. One of them shouted that they had to hold out until reinforcements arrived. The thrones had to arrive and destroy the monsters. Yuna remembered that in his past life, the thrones arrived 30 minutes after the kraken appeared. Since the escape routes were blocked, all hope lay with the players who were on the bridge now. They could defeat the divers, but if no one destroyed the kraken soon, everyone would die. Yuna thought that he had been preparing for this from the very beginning. He had to save his family even at the cost of his own life. It was time to act. The boy took a stationary knife and scissors out of his backpack, and his mother became worried, not understanding what he was planning. Our hero asked his parents to stay close to the players and not leave them until help arrived. The father almost shouted to ask what was going on. He was no less worried about his son than the mother, and also did not understand what his restless child was going to do. Yuna said that for now the players are protecting them, but if something else happens, Yuna can help the parents. He explained everything to her earlier. There was so much confidence in the child's voice that his parents did not stop him. Perhaps this was a result of severe stress. Yunha looked at his sister and said that she was the only one present who could use and control mana, so she should only do it when absolutely necessary. The girl was too scared, and also very worried about her brother and did not want to let him go, but she still agreed. The boy did not hesitate, turned around and ran towards the kraken. His mother only managed to stretch out her hand after him, but could not hold him back. Yunha was determined to kill the monster, save his family, and live a new life, given to him for the second time. He ran between the cars towards the monster with a stationary knife at the ready, but he felt that his speed was not enough. Then our hero decided to use the skill he used as a player. It was not easy in the body of a child, but he managed to use the force and accelerate. It was a heavenly stepping technique, and it was quite difficult for a man in a boy's body, and his strength did not last long. But this way he could instantly reach the kraken, so Yunha decided not to spare himself and move on. He used his heavenly steps again and leapt from one car to another with huge leaps, as fast as an arrow. People who noticed him were very surprised. Not a single child had ever used the techniques of the players in Korea. The hunters, who noticed the boy, ordered him to stop immediately. It was too dangerous, but our hero did not listen and rushed forward. Even the divers froze in surprise. They hadn't expected anything like this, and Yoonhee's speed was so high that they barely had time to notice him. The boy raced across the roofs of cars straight towards the monsters with a stationary knife at the ready. He was ready to attack. Approaching the opponents, Yoonhee managed to envelop his childish weapon in mana beforehand, and it was no longer so harmless. He took out the first diver with one blow, but the rest of the monsters rushed to help, to take revenge on the reckless child. The knife in our hero's hand worked perfectly, despite his short, childish arms and weak muscles, and his combat skills from his past life were beginning to be restored. One blow was followed by another, and soon the number of defeated divers exceeded 10. The boy moved along the roofs of cars, leaving behind the corpses of monsters. When his path was blocked, a couple of movements of the knife solved the problem, but the battle undoubtedly took a lot of strength from the child. Yoonhee then decided not to kill the divers, but simply move forward, jumping over them when it was possible to avoid a fight. If this was impossible, the boy would use a knife. Now he had more strength to strike, and the monsters' heads would fly off with one movement of the knife. To move faster, our hero began to dodge attacks, avoiding opponents. He jumped over monsters from above and rolled under them from below. In the same way, Yoonhee covered the distance between the cars, sometimes jumping, sometimes rolling. His goal was to get to the Kraken as quickly as possible. The knife worked perfectly. The mana reserve was still quite large, and repelling the attacks of monsters was becoming easier and easier. The skills from the past life worked better each time. There was only a little bit left to the tentacles. The road was blocked only by a couple of divers, and Yoonhee realized that he had almost reached his goal. He swung his knife at another monster and practically cut it in half, just like the adult Yoonhee destroyed monsters. It was nice to realize that even in a child's body he managed to fully restore his fighting skills. The boy was rapidly moving forward. Our hero remembered that he had previously possessed a special technique that allowed him to speed up and strengthen his blow. He needed to try to use it now, before meeting the Kraken. Yoonhee tried to concentrate as much as possible and think through a further strategy in order to get rid of all the divers on the way at once. He gathered all his mana into his fingertips and his knife, spun around, and began to act like a whirlwind of blue light. Landing on the ground after a series of blows, the boy assessed the situation and was quite pleased with the result. The diver tried to attack him, hiding below under the debris, but Yoonhee noticed it in time and jumped high into the air, only to then quickly descend and destroy the enemy before he even realizes what happened. Another monster launched a spear at the boy, but our hero jumped again, avoiding the hit. Having finished with the last diver, Yoonhee whispered that it took very little time. He became himself again, became immortal again. The guy added that it was time to end all this. The Kraken was very close. All that was left was to overcome the last few dozen meters. Scissors were added to the knife. Our hero began to jump from one roof of the car to another, simultaneously enveloping the additional weapon in mana. Yoonhee used magical protection on his entire body because he didn't know how strong the enemy was and what to expect from him. The heavenly steps were working even better now. The distance was closing very quickly. Now it was time to use the weapon. The boy stopped in front of the Kraken, and only now did it become clear how tiny Yoonhee was compared to the monster. The hero thought that he would have to fight with the weapon he had, although it was unlikely to cause significant damage to the monster. There was no choice. At this time, the Kraken raised a tentacle, preparing to crush the person who dared to come close to it. The monster missed by a little, smashing several cars standing between him and Yoonhee into pieces. The boy could only hope that there were no people inside. There was not a second to lose, and our hero jumped and landed right on the tentacle, digging into the tentacle with a knife and scissors to secure himself. The monster swung its limb and the boy almost fell down, hanging on his simple weapon, stuck in the monster. The main task was to reach the head, so Yoonhee used heavenly steps again, getting closer to the most vulnerable areas. Having reached his goal, he began to strike blow after blow, hoping that in this way he would be able to cut the thick skin and inflict a more serious wound, delaying time until the arrival of the thrones. A large cut had to be made, and the boy figured out how to achieve this. He climbed onto the top of the head and stuck scissors and a knife deep into the skin. Yunha hung on the weapon and with the weight of his body cut the Kraken's skin in 2 places at once, descending several meters down. It was quite an effective solution. Our hero was glad that he managed to carry out his plan. He wanted to rip the monster open to the very bottom, but he saw in time that a Kraken tentacle was flying straight at him. The boy jumped back to avoid the blow, but that didn't mean the next attack would take a long time to come. Having landed on the ground, Yunha had already begun to think about the tactics of his actions. It was pleasant for him to feel strong and powerful again. True, one of the blades of the scissors remained in the monster's body, but this in no way shook our hero's confidence. Since the weapon resembled a dagger, Yunha again enveloped it in mana and was satisfied with the result. It was possible to attack again. At this time, blows rained down on the hero, but he managed to react quite quickly and did not receive serious damage. Bouncing off another tentacle that fell right on the spot where the boy had just been standing, he began to climb up the Kraken's body again. But another tentacle prevented the hero from carrying out his plan, throwing the boy down like a bug. Yunha was not used to giving up. He climbed onto the Kraken's head again and began to inflict wounds on the monster, putting all his strength and mana into them. In fact, blows of such force did not pass without a trace for the boy. He completely exhausted his body, but in the heat of battle he did not notice this, driven by excitement. Our hero felt like everything was swimming before his eyes, but he didn't pay attention to it. There was no time to feel sorry for himself. The Kraken knocked Yunhu down again with a tentacle strike. The monster clearly didn't like what was happening. He was starting to get angry. The next swing of the tentacle threw the boy so far away that it would have taken him several minutes to reach the Kraken. Our hero rose to his feet, grasping the improvised dagger made from scissors with both hands. He had no intention of stopping. But the monster decided to finally get rid of the annoying enemy, so it launched its next attack on the bridge supports right under the boy's feet. The impact was incredibly strong and smashed the support into pieces, with debris flying like hail in all directions. Yunhei managed to avoid being directly hit by the rocks, but he was now standing on a crumbling piece of the bridge, trying to maintain his balance so as not to fall into the water. Thinking that it was time to finish with this annoying freak, the hero gathered his resolve for a new attack. His mana was already critically low. The boy covered the distance to the whole part of the bridge, closer to the Kraken, in a few jumps, but its tentacles were already ready. They continued to destroy the architectural structure, literally following Yunha on his heels. The boy barely had time to jump away. Climbing over chunks of concrete, our hero sensed that the monster was up to something worse, but there was no time to look back. The Kraken grabbed the truck and prepared to throw it straight at his stubborn opponent. Apparently, that was his plan. The boy hadn't noticed this yet. He was standing and preparing to repel the attack of the monster's other tentacles, which were a little lower and closer. It was only when the truck began to creak from the pressure the monster was putting on it, preparing to pounce, that Yunha noticed the sound. Now the truck is already flying towards the place where the child had just been. Another second and all that will remain of it will be a wet spot. Our hero collected all the remaining mana on the weapon so that the attack power was maximum. It was not so easy. And yet, by nature, Yunha was a winner. He shouted that now the freak would get what he deserved for everything he had done. Raising his simple weapon above his head, he concentrated a colossal amount of energy on its blade. At the cost of incredible effort, the boy managed to cut the truck flying at him in half with a piece of scissors. Even the thrones were not capable of such a thing.